At CBTS, experienced pastors mentor and prepare the next generation of men for ministry. Theological training lays a crucial foundation, but it's the wisdom and presence of a pastoral mentor that truly equips a man for the challenges of Christian ministry.
One thing I love about CBTS is that what we're learning is not just theoretical, but it's pastoral, it's practical, and should be lived out in our lives.
Welcome to another episode of the Covenant Podcast, brought to you by Covenant Baptist Theological Seminary. This is a resource which exists to equip listeners with theological content from a 1689 Baptist perspective. My name is Austin McCormick. I'm one of the pastors of Covenant Baptist Church in Clarksville, Tennessee. I have with me my co-host, Dr. Dovell, one of the pastors of Emmanuel Reformed Baptist Church in SeaTac, Washington, and we have the special privilege of welcoming once more to the podcast Dr. Sam Waldron, one of the pastors of Grace Reformed Baptist Church in Owensboro, Kentucky, and the president of Covenant Baptist Theological Seminary and professor of systematic theology. Welcome back to the podcast, Dr. Waldron.
It's good to be here, Austin. Good to see you and Dewey.
Yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation with you. We're going to be talking about a subject that you teach for Covenant Baptist Theological Seminary. You've taught this class a number of times, the Doctrine of Man. In my estimation, a subject that is not talked about enough, a very important subject, especially in relation to things like apologetics, and maybe we'll touch upon some of that in this conversation. But before we get into the content of the class that you teach for CBTS and this important doctrine of biblical anthropology, can you just give an update to our listeners about some of the exciting things happening at Covenant Baptist Theological Seminary right now?
Sure. A lot of good things happening. We're continuing to see growth in our CBTS Espanol program, and we are enlarging the staff as we are considering hiring a new IT guy, and that decision is going to be made really, really soon. Our brother Roberto Soriano is going to be gradually moving out of the IT position he occupies into a, we hope, fully supported position in the church and in several years. And so we're having to make some preparations for those kind of things. And so we're looking forward to all of that going on, and also the commencement of a couple of more affiliates, one that's been approved in Peru, one in Valencia, Spain, that we hope will be approved by the board sometime soon.
Excellent. And can you give a quick plug to the upcoming Covenant Conference that we just recently announced?
Oh, yeah. Holiness to the Lord, right? CovCon 26, which will be in March, and we have our brother Dr. Joel Beakey coming, as well as Conrad Mbewe, Pastor Conrad Mbewe from Zambia, and we're looking forward to a really good conference on this really important subject.
Well, Dr. Waldron, it's always a joy and privilege to have you on the program. Anytime we have the president, we've got to be on our best behavior, and we hope that we'll give you a warm experience here with us today as we talk about your course on the Doctrine of Man. You mentioned off camera you've taught on this several times, and I want to give you an opportunity to, just as we dive into what's really at the heart of biblical anthropology, we want to give you the opportunity to clarify for our listeners what we mean for man to be made in the image of God. That's such a dense and important topic, and we want to give you the opportunity to kind of flesh out how you tackle that theological question.
Wow, that's a huge question and an important one. Probably the central subject that needs to be dealt with. Not the only, of course, but the central subject. So. What happens in the course is I introduce the course by a couple of lectures on Psalm 8, which of course contains the language, "What is man that you are mindful of him, that you deal with him in the way you do?" And then we go to the part one of the course is talking about temporal origins, where I talk about the alternatives that have been suggested to the doctrine of the confession, which is six-day creationism pretty clearly. And so I provide some critiques of theistic evolution primarily, but also of the day-age theory and the framework hypothesis. But then we move it immediately into the doctrine of the image of God. And this is an important subject, and one in which there's been disagreement historically in the church. What I do is talk about, I give a historical introduction to different views of the image of God that have been propounded in the church, and talk about, is there a distinction between image and likeness? And I show from the scriptures that there's no such distinction, in spite of the fact that there's one prominent early church father that says that image and likeness are not the same. And then I go on to talk about the whole subject of does man merely possess the image? Is it like a limb of what he is, or is it, or is he actually, is the whole subject of the image of God more something that we must speak of as man's real identity? And I argue from several different directions that the image of God is actually man's identity. Perhaps the quickest and easiest way to see that in Scripture is in 1 Corinthians 11:7, where Paul straightforwardly says that man is the image of God, image and glory of God, and the woman is the glory of the man. And what Paul says there is confirmed by the way the Bible speaks about it in many different respects. And then we have to go into the whole subject of then, is it proper then to say that the image of God has been lost in man? And we talk about the argument between a more Lutheran approach to the subject of the image of God, which basically tends to say, yes, the image of God has been lost. But then coming back to the Reformed view, there's a more nuanced view in which you can see Reformed theologians, beginning with Calvin, saying that the image of God in man, while in one sense it's been terribly marred and destroyed, in another sense continues. And that's really typical of the Reformed tradition to say, to answer the question, has the image of God been lost in man? Yes and no. And of course, I argue, if the image of God is the man's very identity, then it cannot be lost without man ceasing to be man. And the Bible never speaks in those kind of ways. And in fact, the Bible throughout, beginning in Genesis 9:6, where we're told that man that man is made in the image of God, and the one who sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, because he's made in the image of God. This makes clear that, of course, the image of God has not been lost in man, but it continues in some sense, because it continues to be the framework in which it's wrong to take the life, murder the images of God. Same thing in James 3:9. We're not to blaspheme men who are made, James says, in the image of God. So those are some of the things we say right at the outset of the whole image of God God discussion with regard to man being made in the image of God.
I appreciate the brevity here. I mean, you spend several lectures covering all of those passages and talking
and
about.
I'd be glad to go into more stuff. I just felt like I should stop talking for a minute here.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about some of the implications of man remaining the image of God. All humans, whether they're lost or saved, are worthy of dignity and honor, of respect, by virtue of being the very image of God on the one hand, and on the other hand, if you're lost, that image has been corrupted and needs to be renewed in the image of Christ. Do you want to elaborate any further upon the doctrine of the imago Dei before we move on to further aspects of anthropology?
Oh yeah, I would like to say a couple of more things. One of them is that when you begin to examine what the Bible says about the image of God, you realize that the Thomistic view that the image of God is simply man being made in the image of God in terms of his reason, and the focus on reason and Thomism is a really inadequate view of the image of God. The image of God in the scriptures is everything that enables man to represent God in the visible world. And it includes things like ruling. And I argue from Genesis 1:26-28, Genesis 5, Psalm 8, that the image of God is not just static. It's not just what he is. It's also what he does and what he does in terms of ruling. You know, in the image of God, he made them, and he said to them, next words, let them rule. And so the whole rule of man in creation is closely associated with the image of God. I also argue that the idea of image is visible representation. And so, contrary to a lot of people, I'm going to say that the body is important to the image of God. It's not just human reason, it's not just the mind. The body is important because without the body, there's no visible representation of God, which is what image and likeness actually tell us. There's no image of God in creation without the body through which men act and interact in creation and show God visibly. Another interesting and really important aspect and application of the image of God in man is to examine the whole subject, so important, especially a few years ago, but still important today, the whole subject of self-esteem, the whole subject of self-image, is closely related to the whole subject of the image of God. Of course, how can it not be? And I argue that when we talk about the whole issue of self-esteem and self-image, we really have to approach that from the standpoint of the image of God in man. And I argue that there are really two different ways in which it needs to be viewed, both of which provide a really important critique of a lot of modern ideas about self-image and self-esteem. And the basic distinction is between looking at the whole subject of image and self-image and self-esteem metaphysically, and on the other hand, what I've called redemptive historically. And here's what I mean. Metaphysically, when you say that man is the image of God, you mean that he's merely the image of God. He's not God. And that compared to God, metaphysically, he is nothing and less than nothing, as Isaiah says. So that the first thing we have to say with regard to the image of God is that we're not God, and except for the reflection of God that may be seen in us as human beings, we have no value compared to God at all. Metaphysically, we are nothing. We're less than nothing. All the islands of the sea are counted as dust, as Isaiah says. So that being the case, we have to begin with a very humbling admission that we're simply the image in the mirror. We're not the person looking in the mirror. And I think that is a really helpful corrective to the inflated views of self-image that you have all over the place. But then I go on to say, but within the sphere of creation, moving out of the metaphysical comparison between ourselves and God, moving into the sphere of creation, we have to look at the image of God in man in terms of redemptive historical categories. We have to look at the image of God and self-image in terms of creation, fall, and redemption. And I argue that we have to have a really, I guess I would say, a complex understanding of self-image based upon the fact that on the one hand, we're created in God's image, and therefore within the sphere of visible creation, within the sphere of, within the finite sphere, there's nothing more valuable than human beings, because they're made in the image of God. On the other hand, there's nothing more despicable than human beings, because they're fallen images of God, and they're all over the place and all the time distorting the image of God in man, and therefore misrepresenting God. But but in the third place, as Paul says in Colossians 3 and Ephesians 4, we are recreated by redemption into the image of God, and therefore a Christian self-image has to not only reflect the fact that he's created in God's image, not only has to take into account that he was fallen, but also has to take into account that he's redeemed and now is recreated in the image of God. And as such, he has the right to a very high self-image because of his relationship to Christ as being remade in the image of Christ. Well, I keep on talking and talking, but there's so much of importance and so much by way of critiquing modern views of self-image that can come out of a simple walk through the biblical idea of self-image.
It's rich stuff, brother. Thank you for tracing us through that, especially the redemptive aspect of understanding the image of God there. It's good stuff. And to our listeners, we want you to know that you can take this class as a CBTS student at any time. Dr. Waldron's also teaching it live right now. You can't begin that right now, but in the future, these brand new lectures will be available. So if you want to continue to learn about the image of God, which is a certainly central aspect to understanding this biblical doctrine of the doctrine of man, please consider reaching out to us and possibly enrolling in that class. We want to transition now to another really important aspect, Dr. Waldron, in understanding man, by asking you this question. Does the Bible teach that man is dichotomous or trichotomous?
Yeah.
And perhaps you can explain those terms to our listeners as you give your answer.
Yeah. Trichotomy is the notion that man is really made of three parts. There are a threefold division in man, and dichotomy is the notion that there's a twofold division in man. How to approach this? Well, as with everything, or with a lot of things, at least I should say, there are, of course, the problem text that attract probably way too much attention and are misinterpreted, I think. 1 Thessalonians 5:23 seems to teach that man is body, soul, and spirit. Hebrews 4 seems to make a distinction in verse 12 and 13 between soul and spirit. And those texts get a lot of attention. I think they're misinterpreted. I think they can be well interpreted in a way that doesn't require a distinction between soul and spirit. And the fact is that massively, dozens and perhaps hundreds of times, the Bible equates the soul and spirit in man. Yes, the two words may have different emphases with regard to the immaterial aspect of man, but they have basically they identify the same immaterial part of man. Some of the things that so that's one of the arguments for a dichotomous view of man. The man is two things. Another thing that argues for that is that in the intermediate state, you don't have three places where man goes when he dies: heaven, or in the case of the unbeliever, hell, and the grave, and then something else. You just have heaven and the grave, or hell and the grave, and so the whole doctrine of the intermediate state really presumes a dichotomous view of man. And what a lot of people don't understand is that the idea of trichotomy did not originate with Christian theology. It really originated in Greek philosophy, and we ought to have a lot of suspicion of it, or from that very fact. Yes, there have been Christian theologians and a few of the ancient church fathers that held trichotomy, but they were mistaken. And I think the Bible is very clear that man is simply body and soul or spirit, and not body, soul, and spirit.
Dr. Waldron, since we're getting into some of the most complex issues relevant to biblical anthropology today, we figured we'd throw you another one in the equation for you to untangle for us, particularly regarding the effect that sin has had upon man's reason or upon man's mental faculties. You've mentioned the image of God in man being marred by sin. How should we understand this concept of the noetic effects of sin? How has sin impacted man's ability to reason correctly about who he is, about God, about the world in which he lives? And then as we think about our approach to apologetics as believers and evangelizing non-believers, how does this reality of the noetic effects of sin impact our approach to those disciplines of apologetics and evangelism?
Yeah, that's a really important issue. Well, the Bible, where to start with this? I guess where you have to start is by saying that the Roman Catholic, basically Thomist idea of the image of God man has to be, first of all, critiqued, because um, their view is that man's physical appetites uh, uh, have a native tendency. They don't want to call it sin, but a native tendency to draw him to a distorted desire for physical things. His appetites really have a downward pull, even though they don't want to quite say it's sin. And the reason, on the other hand, human reason, is viewed as basically not fallen, weakened, yes, but not fallen. And so you have this tug of war going on between reason, which aspires to higher things, and the appetites of the body, which desire lower things, and the will is caught in the middle. What God did by creation was give what's called the donum superadditum, a supernatural grace that helped the reason and the will hold the physical appetites in check, and so that they wouldn't be drawn into sin. Now, of course, from that whole standpoint, then it seems like reason is either not fallen or the least fallen part of man, and this is absolutely not a scriptural concept. The scriptural concept is that a man is fallen as a whole. And this means not only that his will is corrupted, and that his emotions are corrupted, but that his reason is darkened. And Paul speaks in Ephesians 4 of the ignorance, the hardness of heart, the ignorance that is in them. And of course, Romans 1 is key here, because it says that that man by nature suppresses the truth, so that even though he knows God, even though there's a clear revelation of God's existence and character made to him, he suppresses that, so that practically speaking, he comes to the place where he rejects the knowledge of God, and where he does not honor God or give him thanks. And so the Bible's presentation of this and of human reason is very different than the typical view that I've described, and really is associated with Roman Catholicism. It is that man's reason is fallen as well, and that intellectually by means of his intellectual capacities, he really suppresses the truth and unrighteousness, so that man's religions and philosophies, the creation of his human reason, are really the furthest departures away from God, rather than as they're viewed, even in some Protestant theologies. Greek philosophy and Greek religion are viewed as somehow approaching closer to God, whereas Paul sees them in Romans 1 as man's worst apostasy from God. And this speaks loudly about the apostasy and fallenness of human reason as well, that give birth to things like Greek philosophy.
Mm-hmm. So this being the case, knowing that sin has affected the mind of unbelievers, that they're born from Adam by ordinary generation with a natural bent to oppose God, to suppress the knowledge that they hold of God. How does this affect how we might go about evangelizing the lost with our methodology? How does this affect our theology when we're trying to share the gospel with unbelievers? So we know that sin is affecting their mind.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a great question. First of all of this tells us that that in a sense, there's something that's known as pre-evangelism. And the idea of some people advocate pre-evangelism is that you have to first show people that God exists. You have to then show them that they sin, and while it's never wrong to try to teach people that there is a God and that before that God they're sinful, the fact of the matter is that the Bible teaches that men know God by nature, and that their problem is not some deficiency in the evidence for God's existence. Their problem is that they suppress that truth in unrighteousness. So, what does this mean with regard to preaching the gospel? It means that that we must be entirely dependent upon the work of God to remove that darkness and shine the light of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ into their hearts, or our preaching of the gospel will be and can never be successful without the power of God removing the darkness that man's fallenness has created in his mind. And so, but this is a great encouragement because, first of all, we know on the one side that they know about the existence of God, though they suppress it. They know the truth, and so when we preach the gospel to them, we preach to someone who knows that there's a God and who knows the law of God and knows that those who sin against that law are worthy of death. Now, all of that stuff is suppressed. Only God can make them stop suppressing it. But we're not Martians coming from Mars speaking something that they have no relationship to and no context for. They have the context. They know about God. They know about his law. They know about sin, and they know about common grace. And they know all this before we speak one word to them, according to the scripture.
It's very helpful. Yeah. And encouraging that we're entirely dependent upon the work of God to bring sinners from death to life.
Right.
This has been really helpful, Dr. Waldron. I'm sure we could say a lot more. You could say 33 and a half lectures worth of more if we had the time for it. But for the purposes of this conversation, we really don't. So as we begin to wrap up this conversation, we do want to give you an opportunity to recommend resources that you found helpful on understanding and studying the doctrine of man, and give you the opportunity to give final thoughts and encouragements to our listeners after that.
Yeah. I really want to recommend the chapters in Calvin's Institutes that where he deals with this, and book 1 particularly, and And then I want to also recommend any of John Murray's wonderful articles in his collected writings, and as well in Principles of Conduct, where he deals with the whole subject of man and ethics. These are wonderful treatments of course, the appropriate places in Bavinck's Dogmatics and in Gerhardus Voss's Dogmatics, as well as Voss's Biblical Theology and his other writings, are all things that will wonderfully repay study.
Well, I hope many of our listeners will be edified and encouraged by today's conversation with you, Dr. Waldron. I hope many will register for the class. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to give us some really good nuggets of truth to chew on and to meditate on with regards to who we are as image bearers of God. And we're just so thankful for your continued ministry, brother.
Thank you, man. Good talking with you.
Yes, sir. To our listeners, we also want to say thank you as well for your continued support of the Covenant Podcast. As always, we encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you've not done so already. If you were blessed by today's episode, there are other episodes provided by the Covenant Podcast. You can also find conference, seminars, lectures, sermons, other edifying resources provided on our YouTube channel. So please check that out if you have not done so already. And we always appreciate your prayers for the ongoing work of CBTS. Until next time, we wish you grace and peace. God bless.